Some say the climate meeting in Paris is our last hope. Some 500 kilometres away from Paris, this is Jungfraujoch in the Swiss Alps, nicknamed the top of Europe. This isn't just a tourist attraction with stunning views, although that would be reason enough to come here. Instead, its lofty location gives it something of an edge when it comes to taking in the atmosphere. This high-altitude research station is nearly 4,000 metres above sea level. It's one of a network of stations around the world monitoring greenhouse gases. Over the years, researchers have seen emissions go sky high, carbon dioxide being the biggest culprit. Stefan Reimann is one of the scientists keeping an eye on Europe's air.
This is the CO2 measurement here at Jungfraujoch. We are normally above 400 parts per million. The reading about 10 years ago was definitely below, around 380 ppm. This is actually the highest ever, as far as we know, the last 800,000 years.
Bringing emission levels down will be one of the primary aims of the Paris conference. The pressure is on to get results. But that means 195 countries reaching an agreement. It might sound like a big ask, but it's not impossible for the world to come together. This station was one of the first to monitor CFCs, the man-made gas that, as you may remember, punched a hole in the ozone layer. It got the whole world talking.
The problems will only be solved by common action, and every country must play its full part.
The Montreal Protocol signed the death warrant for ozone-damaging substances, most notably CFCs. Now the ozone layer is on the mend, thanks to this uniquely successful international agreement. So when climate change became the big issue, it was hoped the world could agree again. Efforts began with the Rio Earth Summit in 1992 with the creation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which called for the stabilisation of greenhouse gas emissions without saying much about how to do it. But it did stipulate there should be a meeting every year called the Conference of the Parties, or COPs. Paris will be the 21st COP. This will be the nerve centre of the negotiations. It might look a bit messy now, but when the representatives of 195 different countries get going, it's going to get a lot messier still. Unfortunately, when these meetings began, they didn't agree on a voting system. So now there has to be a consensus between every country about every single word and every piece of punctuation on every agreement, in 6 different languages. And this is the woman who'll be in charge of the whole thing. Can I just get your official job title so we get it right?
It's absolutely terrible.
Is it long?
Yes, it is, and it means absolutely nothing to anyone. But anyway, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. I'm very sorry about that.
Do you think we're going to have a deal?
Yes.
Why?
Because governments are not decreasing but increasing their political will, because every single one is already impacted some negatively way by climate change, and they want to address that. So yes, we will have an agreement.
And what's at stake if we don't?
We don't even want to entertain that scenario.
But COPs gone by have been none too inspiring. Although the Kyoto Protocol of 1997 set emission-cutting targets on developed countries, a landmark achievement at the time, America pulled out and others failed to comply. But historically, it had been a good COP. Then came bad COP.
After 2 weeks of talks, the Copenhagen conference ends without long-term agreement on carbon emissions.
The conference ended in acrimony, and already the recriminations have begun. The leaders were invited in at the end, but inadvertently what that meant was that all of the big political issues were left to the final few days for the leaders to solve, and that proved very, very complicated, and essentially they ran out of time. This time the leaders are being invited at the beginning of the conference to set the overall political direction, to empower their ministers.
Copenhagen did, however, snatch one agreement from the jaws of defeat. 2 is the critical number. Copenhagen reached the consensus that a rise of 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century would be just about as much as the planet could take. Any higher and there could be catastrophic changes. But scientists believe global temperatures have already risen by 1 degree since the middle of the 19th century. So as far as this 2 degree threshold goes, we're already halfway there. As emission levels go on climbing, climate models show global temperatures will follow. The higher we head above the 2 degree rise, the more doomsday-like the UN's climate forecasts get. Melting ice caps, flooded cities, loss of wildlife, food shortages, the list goes on.
The CO2 is a really, really long-lived gas in the atmosphere. So if we cut emissions by, let's say, 30%, 40%, it will still go up. So the increase will just be a little bit lower. But nature cannot, still not cope with what we are emitting.
But as we near the next COP, it's felt that the political climate has evolved. For the first time, most of the countries have already set out what they intend to do to cut emissions. These pledges, called Intended Nationally Determined Contributions, or INDCs, will set the tone of the whole conference. Even China and the US are on board. But when the pledged reductions are taken together, the result will still see global warming bust the 2 degree threshold by the end of the century. So is a meaningful outcome already lost?
Instead of being on a trajectory to 4 or 5 degrees, we're in a trajectory to be under 3 degrees. That is not enough either. But it is certainly a huge dent in the irresponsible and runaway growth in emissions that we had before. So it is a constant review and improve, review and improve. That is going to be the dynamic that Paris will set up.
Since the Industrial Revolution, economic growth has largely risen in parallel with emissions. For things to change, growth needs to be uncoupled from our fossil fuel habit. Developing countries are now told they'll need to give their own carbon-intensive periods a miss and use greener alternatives. But how much financial help they'll get to do that will be a big talking point, as will what money is on hand for the countries who'll be hardest hit by the consequences of global warming. In the coming years, places like Jungfraujoch will be among the first to notice whether this summit has made a big enough difference. Last year was the hottest on record. This year could be hotter still. The question arising in Paris will be whether hopes of hitting a 2 degree target are ever achievable or already lost.